Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Mitzel, and I teach at the University of Bologna in Italy. Today, I'll be speaking about Open to Meraviglia. The Italian National Tourism Board gets the humor treatment. So, I think we should start by saying I want to show how the State Tourism Board campaign grounded in high culture, canonical high culture, evolved into a participatory meme cycle. That transformation and evidence is the focus of today. My position is humor memetic remixing converted what was intended as a top-down hegemonic identity message into a bottom-up, horizontal, decentralized counter-narrative area of production, specifically with regards to memes. What began as institutional branding became vernacular discourse. Now, this reflects the dynamics of participatory culture, as Henry Jenkins argued, where audiences are no longer passive consumers but active producers of meaning. So users now have the ability, more than ever, to seize the memes of production. And following Attardo and Schiffman, memes are not isolated jokes or mere artifacts. They are grounds of pragmatic digital text that share form, content, and stance, functioning as social discourse. They circulate within communities, carry ideological positioning, and foster collective commentary, most often anchored in humor. So, what we saw, and you will see here, is not just parody or satire, but a discursive shift and negotiation of meaning. Through this presentation, the images I reference are representative and illustrative. This is not a quantitative corpus study, rather. It's a theoretical and semiomemetic analysis, tracing how meaning moves from hegemony to humor, remix, and recursion. I'm not interested in measuring volume. My objective is to observe, record, and map meaning and transformation. Finally, this is a non-exhaustive study, I should state. The memetic terrain around Open to Meraviglia is dormant now. So what I'm offering here is an interpretation, but not a comprehensive catalog of every iteration in this admittedly small but nonetheless representative sample. Besides, trying to capture even semi-ephemeral iterations and permutations of a meme is a fool's errand. Fool's errand. So the campaign, Open to Meraviglia, or referred to as OTM, from the Italian National Tourism Board, takes a Botticelli-derived Venus and recasts her as a contemporary influencer. That is the core move. The intended bridge between them is clear. Connect the timeless Renaissance art of Italy with the timely platform culture that is merge canonical heritage with the contemporary logic of social media. Now, present Italy as both eternal and algorithmically current. So in theory, in the offices of the Armando Testa group who were commissioned with this campaign, it was probably a hit. So there was a precursor action to the memetic element, which by then was already in circulation, causing memetic criticality. Because the OTM element did not operate in a vacuum, it indexed to culture and through this identity, class, etc., etc. It indexed to tourism as well, in the pressures that people are going on through that, everyday realities of people who do not experience Italy as a museum, but as a lived reality. And these are, again, just to name a few. So what we saw was this campaign laden with high cultural symbolism. When it intersected with the lived economic strain in the memetic landscape, criticality was almost guaranteed. So this is where we can define what I mean by a memetic event. So in this case, a memetic event occurs when an institutional message that is designed to stabilize meaning becomes raw material for participatory reinterpretation. So the public does not merely consume it. They seize the memes of production with modifying and remixing it. It mutates and it is redistributed via the internet as the digital central nervous system. And at this point, authorship or even the concept of the author shifts. I think Umberto Eco's open text is fully applicable here, but again, we do not have time to drill down onto that point. And with that, the meme cycle begins. So let me restate the meme cycle with a bit more precision. In the first sense, we have inception, and that is the state launches Open to Meraviglia. And at this stage, it is an iconic Renaissance template. Botticelli's Venus, again, repurposed for branding. It is controlled, intentional, and not yet humorous. It exists as institutional spectacle. Now, The second phase would be diffusion, and the campaign circulates rapidly across Italian social media. Recognition forms almost immediately, and controversy accelerates visibility. Recognition is crucial. A meme cannot emerge without shared familiarity. This is when memeosis begins and begins to sustain itself, but is still connected to the anchor meme. Now, modification. This is the decisive stage where digital affordances, that is, editing tools, reposting, captioning, platform algorithms, they allow rapid permutations to develop. Hyperlocal remixing begins in this phase. Dialect, regional foods, local politics, economic anxiety, they all start to get sucked into the vortex of the meme. Now, script oppositions multiply, incongruity is triggered. What was once branding becomes participatory critique. The template fragments and proliferates. This is where unlimited memeosis begins, where the ongoing, potentially unbound sign transformation through iterate remix and recontextualization sustains itself indefinitely. Fourth stage is declination. Eventually, saturation sets in, the novelty declines, fewer new variations appear, memetic entropy takes over, and the meme becomes predictable, then uncool. As with most digital trends, cultural capital diminishes once ubiquity sets in. And the fifth phase would be dormancy, or even not even a fifth phase, but just a phase apart that kind of ends the cycle. But in dormancy, it does not disappear. The template remains stored or archived in the memeosphere, that is the sum totality of potential memetic content, and this is extended from Yuri Lotman's semiosis, where it is accessible, the meme content are accessible, searchable, and remembered in the collective consciousness. It is ready to be revived whenever an event resurfaces in a public debate. We should probably, let me define unlimited memeosis clearly. That is an ongoing, potentially unbound sign transformation through iterative remix and recontextualization. Excuse me, it's late. In other words, signs do not stabilize. They continue generating new interpretants as they circulate. Now, why does this go over humor? Why is humor? Because in in cognitive metaphors, what am I saying? Excuse me. Excuse me. With conceptual metaphors, again, speaking, humor is the accelerant here, but memeosis is the engine. So humor makes each mutation instantly legible, shareable, and repeatable, but the deeper process is, again, semiotic expansion. Well, not again, for the first time. Okay. And unlimited memeosis explains why dormancy is never final. Signs can always be reactivated. Now, first, we have to begin with the awareness before we move to action. So let me define what I mean by prominent narrative or prominenti narrative. This is an elite-driven cultural definition of what Italy is and who gets to define it. Italian-American studies has long wrestled with this question for over 100 years on who gets to be and who isn't, and especially some of the work at the early part of the 20th century, H.L. Mencken specifically, talked about how many born and raised in the United States, immigrants and their descendants, and speaking and writing about a restoration of a purer, more authentic Italy. So again, this is something that comes up through the culture, this idea, prominenti culture, of what actually is Italian culture. So it's a contentious space already and for a long time. So culture is not natural, I think. It's an artificial construct that is shaped by power and sometimes to control, sometimes to inspire. So in the case of Open to Meraviglia, the state clearly intended inspiration, but the inspiration did not unfold as planned. I think the campaign taps into the old Grand Tour logic with the proposal of a new Grand Tour, and that is Italy as Art Museum of Europe. But what's different is that this museum is now filtered through influencer culture. That inevitably leads us into capitalism, discourses around capitalism, that is platform economies, branding logics, and that's a much larger conversation that we don't have time for. So high cultural symbols were deployed to address a mass digital audience. That mismatch set the stage for humor. When elite imagery enters participatory space, reappropriation becomes almost inevitable. Take it to political science space and political messaging. This is ripe with humor. And we cannot ignore that memetic selection pressure is shaping users' response. The high inflation in Italy, rising costs of living, youth and middle-aged, underemployment and unemployment, and a sense of political instability or a sense of political stability that feels disconnected from lived realities. These conditions, I think, primed audiences for a critique through the memes. But it's not only a critique, it's also play. Playfulness can itself be a response to power. And when overarching institutions attempt to narrate core concepts of the culture, identity, digital publics answer back. Sometimes angrily, but most often humorously. And I think that's where the memetic turn begins. So this is what I call let's go to the semiotic slide. The same base image, Venus, shifts function as it moves through context. At first, it operates iconically, then symbolically, but once it enters meme circulation, it becomes indexical. And I think it's really important to remember that memes are indexical signs that lead us to pathways or portals to larger discourse worlds. Indexicality, again, is crucial. Because indexical signs anchor abstract branding into lived local reality. The campaign tells a story about Italy as aesthetic experience. The memes point to Italy as lived condition. In my view, memes are fundamentally indexical signs. They point outward into other discourse worlds, as I just mentioned. And when those worlds are not tightly prescribed or controlled by institutional power, they become available for negotiation and what we can call the memeosphere. Again, and this is exactly where regionalism in these memes becomes visible in the Venus case, and you will see those. So memes do not simply parody the campaign, they localized it. They neutralized its authority, and they redirected it. And those are going to be some things we'll talk about in a little bit. You can see that the official campaign selected undeniably beautiful, iconic spaces, Lake Como, the Colosseum, places of what we consider export-ready Italy. But most Italians do not inhabit those spaces. And the ones that do experience it very differently at times from the ministry's aesthetic narrative. So the memes insert dialect, local foods, everyday labor, precarity, the regionalism that is the cornerstone of Italian culture, in my opinion. They move the image again from spectacle to situational. And that is that's where we see these siding semiotic interpretations. And that's where the power also begins to shift. So I think if we're going to talk about power and state-imposed narratives, we have to mention Gramsci. For Gramsci, hegemony is not maintained through force alone. It operates through cultural leadership, taste, norms, language, aesthetics. The state often aligns with bourgeois tastemakers that help define what is acceptable, legitimate, even authentic. It does not just regulate territory, it regulates meaning. So the tourist campaign, having a slide issue. Apologies again. So the tourism campaign was a classic soft power move. Attempted to stabilize the national image, not only for outsiders, but for Italians themselves. I've said, this is Italy. This is what Italy looks like. This is who Italians are. And even in the video from the ministry that was done by the Armando Testa group, it says, it keeps using we a lot, the royal we. So it was definitely very prescribed content. But this is where the wires got crossed, I think. First, I think identity is fluid. I think it's pretty clear that we're here at that point. And it resists prescription. People rarely respond well to be told what their identity is, I think, in free societies, especially by institutions. Second, I think Italy is historically and culturally regional, as I mentioned. Even if regionalism has softened in some ways, it still exerts enormous influence. Local identity often goes above national abstraction. And third, and less theoretically, I think the conflict inherent in the culture, just in discourse, is pretty prevalent. Now, my cousin once joked that his two uncles, my Italian-born cousin, who went to the United States when he was very young, once joked that he had two uncles, on and adjacent farms. They lived right next to each other, and they would pile the manure on the property line. And they fought constantly over whose manure was whose. And my cousin always said, and the punchline was, Italians are the only people who will fight over shit. Okay. So it's humorous, but it makes a point. Contestation is cultural practice. Now, I call the backlash subaltern not because it was unified or coordinated, but because it was decentralized, horizontal, and vernacular. This aligns with current meme research and folklore studies, memes as digital vernacular culture. What emerged was networked, critiqued through humor. And we cannot ignore the role of algorithms as well. Again, going back to uncoordinated, the algorithms now coordinate disparate parts online through things, as Zapovini would say, hashtags in affiliation groups. Platform aggregate and amplify content. They can generate what we might call algorithmic solidarity now, not through formal organizations, but through visibility and repetition. I think in the past, online resistance was dismissed as slacktivism. I think that the label no longer really holds, or it holds in some sense. Digital intervention, when aligned with broader cultural tensions, can meaningfully destabilize institutional narratives. We see in this contemporary political climate, resistance often operates on two prongs, online and offline. In the real prime world, in the digital composite world. And we increasingly toggle between these two. Memes prepare discourse, the streets enact it. So the Venus campaign, the OTM campaign meme, did not simply fail. It was absorbed, reframed, and redistributed within vernacular network of social critique. Now, going back to a conceptual metaphor where incongruity is the engine, Venus should not be an influencer and certainly not a hyper-local one grilling food or speaking dialect. The collision between sacred Renaissance iconography and everyday specificity produces the initial humorous charge. So the GTVH gives us the vocabulary to name what's happening, and the sample of memes analyzed for this study, I saw that identifying recurring script oppositions emerging from material itself, high versus low culture, elite versus local identity, timeless Renaissance beauty versus contemporary economic strain, spectacle versus lived reality. And these then became the triggers that caused the humor. Now, these oppositions are not imposed from outside the data. They are gleaned from the patterns within the remixes. The memes repeatedly mobilize these tensions. What GTVH provides then is a way to articulate the oppositional structures that sampled memes make visible. But I think it's important to stress that the humor is not simply jokes about Venus. It functions as a mechanism for critique. Humor allows people to voice dissatisfaction quickly, safely, and shareably. It lowers the threshold for participation. And also, I think here Raskin's notion of sophistication in humor becomes useful, that humor is not uniformly decoded. Each participant brings their own positionality, their regional identity, their class position, education level, their cultural formation to the interpretation of the meme, which makes them highly open to interpretations by everybody and quite democratic. So people saw different things. Some saw parody, the social critique, political commentary, and others simply enjoyed playing with them and the playfulness that came through the humor. So the same memes circulate widely, but is interpreted through different lenses. Their interpretive flexibility is precisely what makes meme culture in general powerful. It's structured enough to circulate, and it's open enough to accommodate variations ideologically and from the public. So meme spread is permutations or memeplexes, that is shared template, stance, and variations. The cycle pattern is open, official release, parody to localization, escalation, excuse me. Stabilization is reference. Humor becomes cumulative. Each iteration presupposes shared cultural literacy. Now, I mentioned spectacle, and Guy Debord helps explain why reuse matters, that recognition is required for the inversion, détournement, the redirecting of meaning. It isn't just parody, it's the strategic displacement and persuasion in action. These memes don't erase the state image, they reroute it so it points to everyday conditions and therefore opening a new narrative in larger discourse world. So again, they don't erase the state image, they reroute it so as to point to everyday conditions. Social relations mediated by the image, branding images, and organized perceptions are the spectacle, the hijacking, and the redirect meaning against original aim. Venus is kept recognizable, anchor meme have you, and is recontextualized, exposing gap in the brand story. Détournement comes from 1950s, the Situationists. That was interesting. You can check the bibliography at the end. I also think culture jamming is exactly what was going on as well. And it's positioning culture jamming as a circulation level practice. Again, it complements the détournement, excuse me, image at the image level. Meme culture lowers the cost of participation. Small edits become political statements. Digital meme culture scales, jamming horizontally, fast, decentralized. The OTM, national branding, is the target, and humor was the delivery system. So the point is not policy proposal, it's destabilization of symbolic authority. And between détournement and culture jamming, I think it's very interesting that these tactics they're used. In the past, you would have to actually organize in the real world to participate in either of these or actually manipulate material objects in the real world. These things now, through these meme cycle, would be being done on the internet. So again, these old theories and tactics hold in the new digital environment as well. Whether or not people think they're doing it, this is what they're engaging in. Now, remixes embedded hyperlocal markers. So we see Venus in a specific region with a specific dish or phrase. Again, on the left, we see Vacri Abruzzo, and you see Venus cooking arrosticini, very typical culinary delight in the Abruzzo mountain region. And then over, we see open to orecchiette, which is happening in Bari Vecchia. So again, these are the reality. And again, food, dialects, town-specific references bleed into the memes or get embedded as elements into these memes. High cultural national image is brought down into vernacular space, and authenticity here becomes bottom up. Now, what locals recognize, it's what locals recognize and not what the state exports. What else do I have here? This is index. Okay. This is indexicality doing political work, pointing to who owns Italian identity in practice. And I think this is very relevant in terms of all the issues with mass tourism, specifically with the over-tourism that's taking place in Europe. And again, I would point out that the tourism that took place in Barcelona, which is much more active in street, I think the pushing back against tourism in this case was done in a humorous way. So I think we should also look at class here, and I am over time and I'm running out of time. So again, I will continue just a little bit and then round off this presentation. We see the rustic, the working textures appear precisely where the campaign wants to stay polished. Now, I think down in body with the orecchiette, this is a thing that people would not be necessarily considered. But then this is Yuri's this is Goffman's stage and Yuri's back room, front room when they talk about tourism studies and tourism in general, how it's shown. So again, we're seeing back room here coming to the front with Venus as the meme. Now, in conclusion, semiotics and memeosis explains movement. Hegemony explains power, and humor explains uptake. And then we have Debord with the jamming, culture jamming explains tactics. Now, high cultural branding is vulnerable once it ends in participatory circulation. Humor propels semiotic conflict into shareable memetic artifacts of resistance to cultural hegemony. Détournement, culture jamming describe how power is contested through rerouting a message. The horizontal meaning production, that is, the subaltern means back, comes to the fore as a pushback, again, state-imposed notions of reality. And in meme culture, the spectacle can always be rerouted. And dormancy means, okay, so yes, meme circle gives a cycle. At each stage, the sign does not merely repeat. Again, it accumulates meaning. Humor is what makes modifications contagious because it's fun and we want to share them. Incongruity produces shareability as a trigger. Dormancy means the meme is stored in the collective memory. A future tourism scandal, a future scandal in general, political campaign, a piece of pop culture, or cultural debate can reactivate the OTM Venus meme instantly. And again, as I said before, in meme culture, the spectacle can now always be rerouted. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you to HRC for having me speak and record this. And apologies for going over time. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and maybe I'll see some of you for questions on Sunday. If anybody needs to ask any questions to me directly, you're more than welcome to email. And the email is in these slides that will be uploaded. Have a good night. Ciao for now.